Okay, so we would like to call to order the curriculum committee meeting. Everyone in the committee is in attendance, Mark and Judy, and we have Tim, Shell, and Amy Johnson here as well. The first thing we will need is a motion to approve the agenda.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, we're moving on to public comments. We have one public comment for today. Greg is here.
Hello, my name is Greg Gims. I have two daughters in the district. I wanted to touch on 3 items that are on the agenda today on the DEI ad hoc recommendations to the curriculum committee. They are items, I'll first talk about 12 and 13 on your sheets. 12 is create opportunities to ensure equal representation of students of different abilities and backgrounds in advanced placement classes. It's on the second page, third from the bottom. The potential next step is we will review our prerequisites to shift from a gatekeeping philosophy to a welcoming any student mindset. 13 right below that is the recommendation of discontinued tracking systems that may exist based on perceived student abilities. And the next step is we will review requirements to reduce gatekeeping barriers, reach out to all students, including underrepresented groups, to encourage them to take advanced coursework. Of specific concern that I'd like to point out is the absence of focus on academic merit and competency for AP classes, specifically listed from that document. Also in the doc is the terminology of gatekeeping philosophy, which arguably references traditional racial theory that has become ideologically partisan rhetoric in support of systemic racism theory, in my view. Encouraging all students of all backgrounds to take the classes is completely appropriate and great if it is combined with the academic achievement required to be successful within those advanced classes. I question why the focus on academic ability and merit is absent in the recommendations going forward. And I would really like to know, what does welcoming any student mindset actually mean operationally? And what does it do to high achieving kids, for kids without the skills to be pursuing the classes, regardless of their demographics? What does that do for those other kids that, are high achieving? Some of these ideas, and to me, in the next steps recommendations, are ideas that I think you would find in books like Leading for Social Justice, Transforming Schools for All Learners, or books like Grading for Equity, which I really hope is not any kind of track that we take in Waunakee, or ideals that you might find in the Dane County Equity Consortium. I don't want to be like Madison. I don't want to be like Sun Prairie. I would like us to have high academic standards, which I think we do. And we talked, Tim, at a previous meeting about the AP classes and this idea. And I was assured that the rigors of the classes would always be maintained. And I'd like to see that in these next steps, some terminology in that, rather than just the social justice type terminology in my view. The other item was number 3, work with building coaches to develop comfort, capacity, and learning professional learning, and leading professional learning for staff around equity and education. The next step was our instructional coaches include equity topics in coaching cycles and in workshops as appropriate. I would just hope that during this conversation, there is a fleshing out of what equity topics means. It's obviously very encompassing. I've asked for some clarification on that, what's being done throughout the district. And I use those exact words, and the question back to me is, can you be more specific? Well, I'm using your exact words about what I'm looking for, so I'm asking you to be more specific at what those topics mean. I think they can be very loaded equity topics. And again, those topics in books like Social Justice, Transforming Schools, and Grading for Equity, they can encompass things like that. And I would like to know the specificity of what we're actually giving in professional development to our teachers. And I hope that's fleshed out today a little bit. Thank you.
Thank you. Right. Okay, so moving on to our next agenda item. Tim, is gonna give a summary of our advanced placement exam results from last year.
Thank you. And so what we have here is our AP data from last spring, which we received over the summer. And historically, what we track, and again, if I'm an AP teacher, I can get very detailed reports that break down with more information that I can use to kind of look at how we're presenting the course and potentially make adjustments for the future. But what we typically look at from a high level are how many students are participating in AP exams, how many AP exams are being completed, and what % of our AP exams score a 3 or higher. And these are standard measures. AP provides a multi-year report specifically on this. For many years, it actually was in a very easy exportable to PDF format that was very nice to put into Board Book. A few years ago, they discontinued an easily exportable format, but we present the information all the same here. So what we see is, and we've included not 5 years, but 6 years to better show the pre-pandemic trend level, is you can see that we had a rebound in our overall % of tests that were a 3 or higher. And again, for those unfamiliar with the AP examinations, the top score on an AP exam is 5. There's a lot that goes into a 5, but there are 5 levels. And so this is looking at the 3 or higher. So definitely an improvement over, yes, Mark.
Could you clarify for those viewing in what why the 3 support?
That's a great question, Mark. So historically, so AP means advanced placement, and it's a concept that began in the 1950s. So it's a very well-established concept, and it was a way for schools to demonstrate advanced coursework aligned to what was thought to be initial college level work. And that linkage has been updated over time by the College Board, which is the testing association that runs this program. And so historically, 3 on the 5-point scale was the score that would begin to open up some positive rewards to a student based on their AP score. Now that could mean a placement advantage, testing out of an introductory level course into a more intermediate level first-year college course. Depending on the institution, typically not with a 3, but with a higher score, you could potentially even satisfy prerequisites. And in some institutions, although this trend has lessened over time, potentially even having this not only count as a prerequisite, but actually as an earned credit. So today we look at AP as one of several ways to show rigor in a high school level program. Other early post-secondary options, such as dual credit courses, like our world language CAP courses with UW Oshkosh, our entrepreneurship course with the University of Iowa, Project Lead the Way with Milwaukee School of Engineering, our various articulated courses with UW-Madison, Madison College. Those would all be other examples of early post-secondary. But AP is the one that we have a lot of kids participating in due to our number of AP courses at the high school. And again, 3 is kind of the gateway grade to begin to see some of the postgraduate benefits to the AP program.
And Tim, do we have the numbers of the number of students that took AP exams? Oh, that's next. Sorry.
Yep, it will be coming right up.
I'm sorry.
Yes. And so, again, we do see the rebound from 2021. We have not retraced back to our pre-pandemic trend, which was usually in around 80%. We're sitting at 75% now. And we hope to see more retracement back towards the 80% level this spring. Rebecca, next slide, please. So I think this is getting at the next piece, which is what are our participation trends? And so we're looking at a few different elements here. One are the total number of students tested, which has been in the 400s for a while now. You can see that we have a few more students taking it today than would have been the case pre-pandemic. Our high school is also slightly larger than it was pre-pandemic in terms of total enrollment. And then you see the total number of exams completed. So things to know are, first of all, students can take multiple AP courses. Some kids may choose to only take one in their entire high school career. Others may take one a year. Some students will take multiple AP courses at any point in time. So that's why you can have more total exams and total students tested. The other thing that's important to know, and we don't show it here, is that it is of course possible for a student to take the AP course without taking the AP test. And some students do that. There is a cost associated with the AP examination. And unless the student qualifies for a fee waiver, that's a cost that is the family's responsibility. Now in our system, starting actually before this time frame, we moved from a system where students opted in to the AP exam, where we would say, well, if you want your child to take it, register, to a model where we informed families at the start of the year, you'll receive an email, your child's taking AP, we will register them for the exam, we will apply a fee in Infinite Campus. If your child qualifies for a fee waiver, we will automatically implement that. If you don't want your child to take the exam, here's how you opt out of taking the exam and paying the fee. And the reason we did that was to really encourage test participation and also make sure, and again, this gets around reducing barriers to entry. We wanted to be pretty transparent up front for families that would qualify for a fee waiver to know that the fee waiver would be implemented without potentially having to step out and ask a staff member about the fee waiver. So when we talk about reducing barriers, it's often things like that really provide a benefit to a student. So that's our trend over time. And so you can see, again, slightly higher number of students tested than the previous year, and a pretty stable number of exams. We haven't gotten back to our high water mark, which was the pandemic spring of 2020 for number of exams. AP ran a lot of options for taking your exam that year. It's a very lot of flexibility in the spring of 2020.
Are there any requirements for getting into an AP class?
So there has been a time when we put a lot of prerequisites on taking an AP class. In the end, our trend, and this is not a recent trend, this trend goes back, easily a decade or more, is ultimately we want to counsel students and provide them advice about what their long-term goals are, what they feel their readiness is. But if a student wants to challenge themselves, we encourage people to challenge themselves. Now, again, if you take an AP course and you're not well matched to it, it could have an implication for your GPA. GPA matters. We do want students to take that into consideration, but we have had a long-term desire for kids to take rigorous courses. That's why we started, and it's probably been a while since we brought this in, the Laude system as part of our honor system at the high school, which we actually started probably about 15 years ago. And again, the goal was to encourage students to take rigorous classes.
So the concept of gatekeeping and welcoming mindset, we've kind of already done that, changed it around. We're not saying you have to have this much before you get in, but here's some ideas if you to be successful. Is that what you're saying?
Well, there's also assumptions that are made, and we kind of need to think about conversations around. So if I can give an example, we offer advanced English courses. And we have AP Language and Composition, AP Literature. I think there was perhaps a belief held by some that you should take AE 9, AE 10 in order to take AP Lang and Composition. He's no longer with us, but when Larry Hale was our primary AP Language and Composition teacher, he made it a point of saying, if a student has taken the advanced English courses, if they're interested, they really should be in AP. But students, he felt, if they were willing to apply themselves, could be successful with the AP experience, regardless of whether they're taking AE 9 or AE 10 or English 9 and English 10.
So there hasn't been a drastic change from gatekeeping to welcome.
So I think it's a gradual process, and I don't want to say we have no prerequisites at the high school. We do. And in some cases, I mentioned dual credit courses. In some cases, those track back to expectations that some of our higher education partners might have around criteria to take a dual credit course. And obviously, those are part of agreements we sign with our IHE partners. But again, we still have local courses that may have prerequisites. And sometimes local courses where I'm sure the instructor has an objective in mind with the prerequisite, but you look at the prerequisite and, is it really necessary to have a B or better in this preceding course, take this course when this course isn't even necessarily an AP course? So there's just a general, we look at how we're using prerequisites, what's the purpose of them?
Mhm.
Are they helping the educational experience for students in class, or are they not? And again, some of your prerequisites look objective on paper, but it can be your GPA performance in the previous class. And what if you had a significant family event that year? Does that mean you don't get to take a subsequent class? So I think it's just a general approach of moving to more of a counseling model than like a strict gatekeeping criteria. Mark?
Tim, where prerequisite exists, is it a teacher prerequisite or is it a department prerequisite?
That depends a bit, I think, on the culture of the department, but I think in many cases, it's if it is a course that is taught by multiple teachers and it's a team approach. We have certain electives where we have one instructor for the elective. So when the course book is developed and the instructor reviews the description, that would probably be the instructor's recommendation.
So what are,
Well,
some-
sure.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
I guess which raises a question, if there's a prerequisite, shouldn't that be a more uniform expectation versus, okay, I'm teaching this course now, but now Judy takes over and, well, because she's the one teaching, she'll change the prerequisite.
So I think that's a conversation we want to have more of at the high school. And if this, as you work through our next agenda item and you get to those items and you want to have a bit of a deeper dive into what prerequisites we have in place and why we're there and kind of what the process is for a prerequisite getting into the course book and then how it's implemented, that might be worthy of bringing in some of the high school team in a subsequent meeting down the road. But, I think, I do think if you were to look at the perceived rigor of the courses, the reputational rigor, I guess is what I would say, of the courses. And then you would look at where we had prerequisites in place, and you would not see a one-to-one correspondence.
I think it would be good to continue this conversation when we move on to our
Mhm.
audit steps. But a question that I have. So we were at 80% of our students over in 2017, 18, 19 got a 3 or higher.
Mhm.
and then it fell during the pandemic, and we're moving in the right direction.
Mhm.
I'm wondering what steps we're taking, or if there is a certain classes or certain AP where we saw a trend that maybe that we could, focus on to make adjustments. I'm assuming those things happen, but to make adjustments so that we can, improve our results for the students.
So I would say if we were to kind of get a little deeper into this, trends that you would see, and again, not unexpected, is that courses that reach a higher percentage of the student population will have a lower percentage scoring 3 or more. If you've got a course that is maybe only 30 seniors in the entire district, those are typically the AP courses with the highest percentages. And that probably doesn't surprise anybody around the table. And then courses that might involve as much as 30 or 40% of that class, of that 10th grade class, for example, have a lower percentage. So the more broadly you go into the pool has an impact. I think the other trend is that courses with seniors, so students who've had more academic experience, students who've had more experience taking the AP examinations, which are longer examinations than a student would typically take in a standard high school course, usually fare better on the exam. So I think age and grade matters, and I think the size of the pool and the course has an impact on the exam performance. And I would say, I think the impact, and again, I'm talking in very general terms, but the pandemic was disruptive for many students' education. The more years of typical education a student had, the less, on average, and again, I'm very much making a generalization here, but the more experience they had, the less disruptive it was. The fewer years you had, obviously the pandemic affected a greater portion of your formal education. So I do think, as we look at this, the course that's taken by our 10th grade kids, AP US History, that's the one I think that, has been impacted the most by the pandemic. I mean, the students who took AP US History, this past spring, they had been in 8th grade when the pandemic hit. Their 9th grade was the year where we, were virtual for the first half of the year at the high school, then came into hybrid. And it was only the 4th quarter that we came back into regular session. And even then, we, had a significant number of kids still learning virtually. And that was their 9th grade experience. And we know that 9th grade is a very important transition year. So not startled to see that was the lowest course. And it's always been a course with a little lower percentages because the number of kids taking the course and the age of the students. But I think the pandemic amplified that. So if that's the case, then this year's cohort, who, even though we had some impacts last year, we were in regular session the entire year. We had very, very few kids learning virtually last year, a handful, full-time virtual. We would expect with that being their 9th grade experience, then their experience in all of their classes as sophomores, including AP US History, would look different than preceding.
So we anticipate with that course in particular, because they had a in-person, more regular experience as 9th graders, they're better prepared to
Yes.
be successful in that 10th grade AP US History course.
And not only in 10th grade AP
Yeah,
US
in-
History, but
in
really all of their
everything.
10th
Yeah,
grade classes.
sure.
It's just, this is one that contributes to an actual report that actually comes up in a screen in one of our meetings. But yes, and I think Greg in the audience has a question.
Yeah, would you mind if I ask a clarifying question about numbers? I was just wondering, so for clarification, AP is offered starting at 9th through 12th.
So unless there's a very exceptional circumstance, it'd be 10 through 12. There are AP courses like human geography that you will look at some high schools that would be offered in the 9th grade year. But the earliest most of our students would take an AP test would be in the 10th grade year.
And then, so we don't have numbers right now of the actual number of students that are available to take AP compared to how many take AP. Do you have like a percentage thought process on that? What is the grouping of 10th through?
Yeah, we do. It's
Whole
not,
number of
it's not on this report though.
Do you have any of that in your head, like what percentage of our students actually do one or more AP classes? Just one, right? That's it. That's all I have.
We have a report that has that, and I can't pull it from memory right now.
Okay.
But if you'd like me to follow up with you on that, Vic, I'd be happy to do that.
Sure.
All right.
So how does this compare to a national average? Is there a comparison point or not?
So I would have to go back
For
and,
ACT, we can do that.
Yeah.
Is that available for this or?
there are national numbers for AP. We typically haven't looked at those.
Okay.
You know, and here's what, but we could. So I mean, if that's an interest, can certainly go back and pull that information and return with it in a month or two. Things to know about AP testing are, in general, you know, it's not a bad thing to compare to because in general, you are looking at apples to apples. I mean, kids are taking a similar exam. In many cases, they're taking it for a similar reason. There's been a great interest nationally, and this actually goes back, I would say, 40 years to the Nation at Risk report in 1983. There's been a great interest in looking carefully at the rigor and access to rigor in the high school program in the United States. There was a concern in the early 80s that we did not have enough rigor in the high school program, and we were not encouraging enough students to take rigorous courses. So those were twin mandates. And really, high schools have been encouraged for the last 40 years to attend to those twin mandates, rigor and access to rigor. So you will see schools in settings where there is more competitive enrollment, typically urban areas, not suburban areas, not rural areas, to have schools that will be all AP schools. So they will have, they will look carefully and where they can bring in a 9th grade AP class, they will. And the expectation is you don't have a choice of American history or AP US history. If you're in 10th grade, everybody's taking US history. And that's not a bad thing. I mean, the kid is being exposed to you know, a high level of expectation. They're learning valuable skills. Students will make different progress in mastering those skills, but they're being exposed and they're having the opportunity to up their game academically. But I mean, I do think when you look at national numbers, you have to know that there are some schools that are more selective, that have very tight prerequisites. And you'll have other schools in there that really have universal AP programs. Just like you'll find high schools out there that have universal international baccalaureate programs. And again, the idea is not only the rigor, but the high level of access to rigor.
But more than a national, I guess, peer group, state level, something of that sort, that would at least just give a comparison. How are we doing compared to our peer schools in Wisconsin? I mean, the national's a nice trend, but that probably would be more meaningful.
Historically, very similar. We have not actually run the numbers on 2021 and 2022. So again, if that's something you'd be interested in seeing as a committee, we could bring that back later this fall.
I think that's a good question.
Mhm.
It helps us as a data point. That helps us kind of see where we're at and where we're trending.
Yeah.
I think it's a good question, Mark.
Certainly can bring that back next meeting or certainly the meeting after.
I think there's one more slide after this slide, unless anybody has any questions. More questions on the AP testing over time slide.
Yeah, and the last slide is just stating kind of the two summary points, which we've already talked. So I mean,
Oh, okay.
I think that, and that's what we have, but I think what I'm hearing, the request from the committee is come back in the next month or so with comparative data against our benchmark districts in Wisconsin, maybe Dane County, and pull the national rate and give us the multi-year trend. That sound right?
That sounds good. Yes.
Outstanding.
Okay, thank you, Tim. Okay, so moving on to our next agenda item. We will be discussing the DEI audit recommendations, and so we could have the option to get through all of these recommendations today, but we'll kind of look at managing our time. And if we don't get through everything, we'll discuss it at our next meeting. So I don't know, Tim, if you want to kind of give us a background, or Amy, a background of the audit process and where these recommendations, how they were arrived at, how we arrived at these audit recommendations, and then kind of give, then we can go through each one too, but just a little background is helpful, I think.
I can set kind of the high level stage. So again, as I think we all know, the board charged an ad hoc committee with that contained staff, it contained parents, it contained some students to come up with a set of recommendations on diversity, equity, and inclusion topics for the Board of Education. They delivered that report roughly a year ago. And as a board, you have been moving forward with evaluating and processing through those recommendations. And so what we have done, and we've seen some other committees do this, is we have grouped the recommendations from the ad hoc committee by the board committee that seems most functionally aligned to those recommendations. So what you have here are a set of recommendations from the last year's ad hoc committee that relate to the work of the standing curriculum committee. Same thing applies to the standing diversity and inclusion committee of the board, HR, budget, etc., policy. So what you have here is a left-hand column, which is a recommendation from the ad hoc committee. And again, it's kind of a standard format. So the committee just means these are the items that align with the work of this committee.
Mhm.
And then on the right-hand side, after internal administrative review, this is the administrative team's summary of where we are on this particular item. And if the administrative team has thoughts on how to proceed, that's been offered in here for your consideration as a committee. Now, the way this is structured, the earlier items here tend to lean more towards the earlier years of our educational system and some of the professional learning items, a little more Amy's area of responsibility, and the latter areas lean more towards the later years in the system, which is a little more the area I work more closely with. So depending on the item, I might be the better positioned person to add context or Amy might be.
And one of the things when we prepared for this that I kept coming back to, it was a question that I had, was the items on the left, and this is, I think it's a good point of clarification. They were established as, so for example, the first item, offer ongoing professional learning opportunities that afford space time to process, reflect, and apply new learning. Is that an area that the ad hoc committee decided, looked at data and said, oh, that's something we need to work on, that's a problem? Or is it, and then I'm just asking this because it's
Yeah.
something we talked about. Or is it an item that they think that ad hoc committee came back to and said, that's something that we should always be looking at, that it wasn't necessarily an area that needed improvement, but it was from their perspective, an area that they thought. Just clarification on how these items came to be on the, you know, on the left-hand column. Where
Yeah.
they got that information from to make it a recommendation of something we need to discuss or work on.
So that's a great thing to bring into the conversation here. So the ad hoc committee worked for a long period of time. They did look at a lot of information, and there are a lot of perspectives around the table. But yes, in the committee's work, in the ad hoc committee's work, there were both what I would call strategic recommendations, which are areas we want to work on for growth and improvement. And there were areas that I would call operational recommendations, which are already in place. We want to make sure that we never lose sight of the importance of those. And if we have an opportunity to do it better, we could. So there's a mix, exactly as you stated. The other thing to keep in mind, and this will become apparent with some of these items, is the ad hoc committee began work late in 2020. And, you know, the information they were looking at and the experiences that, you know, were informing that conversation might have even been backdated from that. So if there was something that was already an area where we're putting additional resources in, the current reality then and the current reality now may be different. And this will become apparent in a few weeks.
As we discuss them. Okay.
And these came out of their audit, their use of their audit
Yes.
tool would have prompting questions or
Yes.
things for them to look at. So some of it is a result of the tool. perhaps.
That's a great observation, Amy. Yes, so the committee did work with an actual instrument that guided those conversations, that chunked out their work over a set of meetings. The committee would usually assign a set of individuals on the committee, usually staff that were more close to the information, to bring some preliminary information together for the committee to consider. But yes, it was following an audit tool because, again, the committee represents a lot of backgrounds and experiences in the district, but it was felt useful to have a structured instrument to guide the conversations, so as not to miss anything.
I just appreciated looking at what the administrative summary said where we are, because I think sometimes you see a problem and you don't realize the background has already been worked on. Like you say, 4 years ago, this was a problem, but in the meantime, we've been doing things. And so to know that we're working towards things and it's going to take some time to do and to keep things in mind. So I didn't find a lot of glaring holes that we needed to quickly do something. I thought we've been working pretty well and tweaking it. So I was glad to see this. I do have a question on the fourth one down. What does RTL
Can I
stand for?
suggest we start though, kind of
With the first item. and then-
sequentially?
You want to go
work our way
sequentially
down?
for each item?
Okay,
Is that okay?
sure.
I think that's a good plan.
So the first item relates to professional learning. And it really was more related to kind of our model for professional development days and workshops. And I don't know, Amy, if you want to speak to that.
I mean, sure, it's, the item recommendation is making sure that we offer time to process and apply. You know, we have so few professional development days that sometimes we want to, put a lot of learning in there, and then we would have, especially like elementary teachers. Okay, here's a little bit on science, now we got to do some math, and there wouldn't be time to really process and apply. So this is not really specific to DEI work. This is just like adult learning, recognizing that we need time to reflect and process the new learning. And We've heard that feedback and we agree that that's an important part of, learning. And so we have tried to, whether it's at the end of the day or after each kind of session or fewer sessions, really build that in. So I feel like that's something that we have been responsive to and will continue to do.
From a historical perspective. So I have not participated recently, but I do think as a district, we do a lot of one and dones. And I don't know if we want to put praise in here to encourage that we have a staff development at the start of the school year. And would it be helpful to, instead of having new sessions at later development days, revisit to build on that skill set, particularly when we're looking at district-wide initiatives. And I know that that's the problem when we have district and building, but even building-wide, if you're looking at a new approach to reading, as an example,
Yeah,
would be
I
helpful
do
to
think,
have.
that-
You start and then, okay, instead of the mid-year being something different because now it's a discipline thing or whatever, that we're giving staff time to to reflect. I think that last part's the key thing, reflect and apply. And that's the hard thing institutionally.
Yeah, I mean, we are striving to do that, Mark. So professional learning communities, as you know, is a big focus.
Right.
So we had a full day focused on that in August. We have another full day in February. We have principals who are committed to bringing that back during staffing. So we are trying to really narrow those topics and bring them back. We have a new phonics program at the elementary level. So we had our first training in May. We have our next training in August. We have like monthly check-in. So we are really trying to have fewer topics, deeper rather than the kind of the one and done.
Are there any other questions or discussion points for this first item on this list? Okay.
And I would say just, as you work through these item by item as a committee, I mean, you may look at this and say, this is something we'd like to bring back for further discussion, like we talked about with some of the AP pieces. Or you may say, looks good, keep on this. Maybe we want to hear back on this at some later point in time, just to make sure we're still on track.
Okay.
The next item from the ad hoc committee was extend learning opportunities regarding culture and implicit bias to all staff. And I think, as we discuss this administratively, the thinking was we have done some work in this area, but this has not been one of those things where we have done something that's been all inclusive for our staff. And, I think there's value in that because as uncomfortable, I mean, I don't think any of us, sit comfortably with the concept that we may, within ourselves, have significant biases. But we probably all do to some degree in different forms. And so the concept of doing training with staff on implicit bias is providing staff, educators with some strategies to really reflect on, how they view their work, how they view students, and trying to become more aware of any biases they might have. And so then, what does that look like? That's the type of workshop that, I don't think in the time I've been in the district, we've ever done.
And do you find that that is a goal, like that's something you want to do, or that you're able to
address those areas and weave those things into other learning opportunities for staff.
So I mean, I think, you know, for any teacher, I mean, you want teachers, you know, and I, you know, as an educator, you want to know your students.
Mhm.
And you want to have constructive relationships with the learners in your classroom. So, you know, that requires, you know, conditions in the classroom where students are comfortable sharing. And it means as a teacher, you need to, you know, make sure that you are treating every student fairly, and it's, and kind of taking stock of, you know, are there certain ways that you might look at students differently that could interfere with a good learning environment in your classroom for that student? You'd want to look at it. So I mean, I think the concept of relationship development and treating kids fairly in your classroom is an internal concept.
Right.
I think as we find, you know, Waunakee and other schools, we've got students from different backgrounds than the instructors in the classroom. How do we ensure that everything is operating well for all of our kids, regardless of whether they share a lot in common with their instructor or not, is an important role for us.
When you're planning out the year for like in-service and areas that you want to work at, how do you decide what the push is going to be for this year, and maybe you have a 3-year plan? I don't know, do you have a plan?
Yeah, I mean, some of it, you know, we try to be responsive, but we do, you know, have those big overarching goals, as I mentioned, like professional learning communities,
Yeah.
right? That's been a thread for many years. And then after the last couple of years, we felt like, oh, we really want to, you know, kind of reboot that this year and have a little bit more of a focused effort on it. So there are some things like that that do kind of thread throughout. And then there are others, as I mentioned, like the new phonics program, you know, curricular based, that, oh, that's a focus of ours, you know, for this year.
So you do get some one and done, but you've also got some long range ones that you're working on.
Yeah, I mean, if it is kind of a discrete topic,
Yeah.
it can be. Sure.
But I would imagine it's difficult to cover all the topics that are out there that you'd like to work on. And so I think when we look at, have we done this one, or, you know, some of these, no, but they're on our radar. Is that right? Would you say? So this implicit bias is on our radar, but it's not necessarily a one and done, and it's built into what we're going to be doing. I just think it's an overwhelming thing to think about how to do staff development for the topics that are out there and still not have it be so diffuse that it doesn't do any good. So I like the idea that you've got, this is specifically a focus, and we're not going to lose sight of the other one, but this is our focus right now. I don't know if there's a question in that, but
So is this one, there's a vagueness with responsiveness, so, but not consistently district-wide. So is this one that's worthy of putting a high priority on? For as a former teacher, I look at this and you shared the book, Culturally Responsive Teaching.
Mhm.
And when I started reading it, I thought what I was going to get was different from what I got, because as I started reading it, you can, just on the one issue of ethnicity, you can erase that whole concept if you want, and just look at it from a students in general, and how many kids I had come into my classroom, and because they're all dressed the same, you think they're the same. And as you start teaching them the same, so I started reflecting about how whatever biases I had affected how I taught the general without taking into account the individual differences within, because they all look the same. for the most part. They dress the same, they act the same. And so they must be all in the same position. Then you realize there's a story behind each of them that affects their learning. And so to me, this is really at the heart of being able to be responsive. And I think at times we assume every teacher comes with a toolbox that does that. And I don't think that's necessarily the case. And so is this something that rather than, well, okay, we've done an isolated, should it be an emphasis in the near future on getting it on the calendar somewhere? Well, at some point we're going to do it. Do we, whatever these items are, should there be a little bit more concreteness as to if or when we're going to address them?
And I wonder if that's an overwhelming task.
I'm sorry.
I wonder if that's an overwhelming task.
I mean, this is an important concept for reasons that we've discussed, but, particularly in that book, it points out, because where that book leads the teacher is how do you become a warm demander? How do you push your students academically? Concepts that are eternal concepts for teachers, eternal concepts for coaches, eternal concepts for managers. And, as parents, we can tell our students, this teacher may not be your favorite teacher, but I expect you to work hard and do your best. I think all parents, at least I hope all parents have that conversation, because it's true, not every child likes every teacher the same. And I think typically, if we think back to when we were students, or when we were players on a team, or if we had a supervisor, there's some people who seem to have a knack for bringing out the best of us. And sometimes that's active teaching skill, but it also can get down to our comfort level with the individual. So the concept here is that if the teacher has implicit bias, and there are different things that may happen from week to week that cause the student really not to connect with that teacher, it's harder to push that student to maximize their potential in the class. So that's kind of the underlying concept of why it's important to address implicit bias, because setting positive conditions in the classroom, then you can really push your kids to higher levels of learning and don't respond to that push because they have a high comfort level with you.
It's been a while since I've read that book, so I don't want to misquote Soretta Hammond, but I do believe her approach, like some approaches might suggest that you start with implicit bias work, and she does not come from that lens. And because we have done a lot of work with that book, I think that's why we haven't emphasized that work.
Yes.
Good. I remember.
Nope, you remember correctly. I mean, again, and this is, something, Amy is very patient working with all of us with our request for professional development topics as our professional development coordinator. There are a lot of demands on a fairly limited amount of, because it's one thing to offer a workshop, and if somebody shows up to take it for points, they do. And that's a big part of our system. But if you want all of your teachers to experience the same learning, that can only come through staff meetings or professional development.
So what should the next steps be? Mark's suggesting that we perhaps star this one. I'm hearing Judy say she thinks it might be too much. So, or
I mean, if I don't know, I think part of the task of this group is, if this group wants to direct us to include that in our professional development, I think if you want to say this is a priority, it hasn't been consistent, we'd like it consistent, then we can act on that. I mean, I think this is to get some of your direction.
I can suggest, and I'm not sure we did it right, but with the DEI committee, we had our own list that we had to look at. And we looked at the administrative recommendations, and I'd say there were very few that we didn't add our own recommendation to
Oh,
it.
okay.
Some we accepted and say, yep, don't need to do anything more. Others said, well, yeah, but we'd also like this, this to be considered.
Okay,
And so I guess I don't know if that's something we feel comfortable with the committee, but I think that was kind of the idea that when these questions were targeted to different committees, that was the idea
Okay.
that there be committee input as well, not just, and say, oh, okay, and then just move on.
so we can add another column to this.
Or just bullet points to the,
Sure.
to the third one.
Okay.
I have some questions about being, as a committee, as directive as that to the administration of what you should be doing. I don't think, yeah, I have trouble with the board being as directive specifically.
I agree.
I mean, I think the administration is in charge of education and we're overseeing it, and I don't like to get my fingers in the details.
I agree.
Yet as a board, our directive was to look at these and as a board come up with our recommendations, not just the administration.
Recommendations or? I mean, if
For
we-
example, some of them, we said, the first one, it's ongoing, that's happening. And I think as a committee, we'd agree with that. But if we have ideas that we want to recommend action as well, there's no reason we shouldn't be able to do that, because it was our job as a board to look at the recommendations from the initial ad hoc committee and decide if we wanted to act on them, how we wanted to act on them, or if we didn't want to act on them. We weren't just going to rubber stamp
Yeah.
it. This was their recommendation, and then our job as a board was to look at it and say, okay, yes, no, how?
we're not going to rubber stamp, but I also don't know that can go through, there are 17 items here to give, let's fix this, let's do this, let's do that. I think if we were to review this and say, here's some we have to consider again, reorganize them again, and then look at and say which are the ones that seem to need help. Not necessarily give an answer to it, but to say which are the ones that we feel like, oh, we need more work on. And then from there, we've synthesized it down to maybe 8 out of
Right.
the 17. And then I would spend time thinking, well, what's my recommendation for this issue? As opposed to each one of these to go, I think it's too intense for us to do that.
I also think it's a little bit of a challenge because so some of the stuff is, it's not all data driven or so it's subjective. So when, extend learning opportunities regarding culture and implicit bias to all staff. And then we say we have isolated learning opportunities, but it's not consistent district wide, but then it's sometimes weaved into the learning. I think it's hard for me to say, oh, well, we need to do X, Y, Z if I don't really know. I mean, it's just hard to give that directive when I'm not an expert in education and where our priorities, where we're spending our time. I'm not participating in the learning.
Yeah, I agree.
If I could make a suggestion, I think it's safe to say you'll be hard pressed as a committee to get through all of these in this morning's meeting. So one possible approach would be to go through them and then circle back, because some of these, you know, again, like the first one that Amy spoke to, it's a message about adult learning that we've been receiving. We've been trying to incorporate that more in our approach. There's not really a recommendation there from the administrative side. Some of these will say, yeah, we should look at this, or we want to try something different. And you also always have the option as a committee to say, here's something we're hoping to hear back from you by the end of the year on. Here's something we might circle back to in 2 years and just kind of see where it is. Not everything has to happen at once, because if you try to do too many things at once, then you don't go deep on anything. So if I could suggest, I would say go through these without necessarily coming to a direction for administration, or whether it's come back in a few months, end of the year, next year, just kind of discuss these, and then maybe at the next meeting, come back and see where you're at as a committee, once we've had a chance to go through all.
And get a better understanding of what each item is. So we can think about it and then come back.
And I have to apologize because my husband's home from the hospital and I didn't realize he was going to be there when we had this meeting. So I need to get back and see how he's doing.
We
So-
hope he's doing well.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah.
Yes.
So he just had a knee replaced and came
Ah.
home. He came home yesterday, so I don't want him alone too long.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So I don't mind, I've printed them out, and if you're gonna go through all of them today, that's fine, but I'll look at them and
We
then.
won't get there.
No.
Okay.
It
So,
took
but I
it took
like
our
that.
committee 3 meetings to get through ours, and we had
Okay,
considerably more, but yeah, so.
yeah, and I have gone through them and had some questions, but
Yeah.
I like the perspective that you guys bring too, but again, I want to emphasize, I don't want to direct the school what they should be doing. School board, so,
Okay.
excuse me.
Thank you.
Best wishes to your
Yes.
husband.
Thank you. He looks good, but he's on drugs. so.
Yeah.
Well, we're hoping,
I've gone through 2, and I think this should be easier because mine were years ago.
Oh, okay, good.
steady, hopefully a steady and uncomplicated recovery, and that he
Yes.
enjoys the new hardware.
Thank you.
Thanks, Judy.
Bye-bye.
So the next item, and this is really, the area that Amy leads for us, is work with, from the committee, the ad hoc committee, was work with building coaches to develop comfort and capacity in leading professional learning for staff around equity and education.
Yes, so each of our buildings has one instructional coach, and that person really works with the adults in the building, not necessarily the students directly, although they are in classrooms quite a bit, working side by side with teachers. But that's a model that really provides job-embedded professional development. So we don't have to wait for those workshop days. We can provide professional development ongoing throughout the year, just in time, individualized for teachers. And so it looks like the recommendation is working with them to develop their capacity. So they do receive a lot of professional development themselves in order to be effective coaches. One organization that we use quite a bit is the Dane County New Teacher Project. They attend monthly forums there with other coaches. They attend workshops. So that's one way that they have really built their expertise and honed their skills. So then our response there is that coaches have included equity topics in coaching cycles and workshops as appropriate. So a coaching cycle would be when the instructional coach is working sometimes one-on-one with a teacher, sometimes it's a partner, or sometimes it's a whole grade level or collaborative team. And that's on a topic of their choosing. So they will approach the coach and say, I'm really interested in improving my practice in, X. So they might say, I am really struggling with how to organize my literacy block. And the coach might come in. Or I want to devise some open-ended math taxes or something like that. So they could also ask about, I guess, what you might say, an equity topic. So I would say equity is, making sure that all learners get what they need in order to fulfill their potential. So a lot of the coaching cycles are really student-centered and data-driven. So a teacher might come to the coach and say, I've looked at my reading data. I am not getting my students with disabilities up to the reading benchmark. A coaching cycle around that. So that would be a subgroup of students, really targeting some strategies to help them. Maybe a teacher would say, I need some help creating visuals or doing some, best practices with my English language learners. So that would be a coaching cycle. So the work that the coaches do is pretty individualized and based on requests from teachers. So that's why I think you said, as appropriate, because sometimes it would be more general, like help me set up my literacy block or help me create these math tasks. And sometimes it might be more focused, like I want to look at my practices for this group of students that are not currently in my classroom. So that's a little bit more background about what we meant when we're talking about as appropriate.
Okay. And we had Greg came in with the question about the terms equity topics, and he gave a couple of examples of what that means, and to make sure that all the learners are have what they need to fulfill their potential. So thank you for clarifying that.
The next item related really to our support for struggling students. So the recommendation from the ad hoc committee was evaluate and monitor progress of students and, in parentheses, response rates with an RTI framework. So RTI is an acronym. It's been around for about 15 years. Response to instruction or response to intervention. It's really when we think about that third question of professional learning communities, what do we do when students haven't mastered an essential skill or concept? How do we support them? And of different abilities and from different backgrounds, report progress to the Board of Education. And so our administrative response was, again, this was asking us to look at our support model and how's it working for different types of learners. And again, I mean, we're not all the same. What is a good strategy for me might not be a good strategy for Amy or for someone else in the group. So kind of our administrative piece here was reviewing our data to determine whether our systems of support are serving all learners. Well, it's obviously extremely important. I mean, it's student success is why we're here. It's important to know that what we're doing is effective. And it has been a few years since we've done a comprehensive look at outcomes on our support programs. Now, a challenge with the particular recommendation of the committee is that when you look at progress, you typically are looking at grade level assessments, and within any grade at any particular school, the numbers of students who are in academic support is not all that large. And because most of our students do not require ongoing academic support. And then within the kids who require academic support, if you're trying to look at different characteristics of pupils, then you are slicing that already small slice of the pie even more thinly. And then is your data really large enough to be reliable? So that's why we have the piece in here that the data we may need to look at more at the district level, so we get larger numbers and can make better conclusions. But when we do that, we are going to have to be a little less focused on, say, third grade versus eighth grade. And it's just kind of the nature of our number of students that are receiving supports. So, I mean, I'd just say kind of, as Amy and I talked about this, it's important. We can bring back the information. I don't think we have a timeline for you on when we could bring back that type of information, but it's probably going to have to be higher level versus say, what does this look like for third grade at Arbor? Any questions on that item?
I'm just trying to understand. So
Yeah.
when it says different backgrounds, and then we would, so evaluate and monitor progress of students of different abilities and different backgrounds. So the data that you would come back with can't be too specific, but when you talk about, just because of privacy, that's what because those different.
Well,
backgrounds are
privacy and also reliability. So, let's say we're looking at math supports for 7th grade students. The number of students receiving math support is not going to be all that numerous.
Right.
And then let's say we're concerned, how are our math supports working for English learners that are receiving math supports? Well, I'm going to pick a number, but that could end up being 2 or 3 students.
Sure.
And if one makes progress and one doesn't,
Yeah.
is that 50%
Right.
effectiveness overall, or is it reflecting something unique to the student is more random than a trend? When you get to larger numbers, you can be more confident it's a signal about what the intervention is doing rather than what the support is doing, rather than how
So when we say different backgrounds, what's that entail? Like what's included in that? So in ELL.
So I think the committee is wondering how does this work for students with different language backgrounds, so EL? How does this work for students who come from lower economic households? Maybe less exposure to print at early ages, for example, or less access to tutoring outside of school. How, when you have examples, do they work equally well depending on your race or ethnic background? And I think these are all good things to look at. There are things, that I think, many different sectors in life want to, you have something you think works overall, doesn't connect equally well with all of your customers, doesn't connect equally well with all of your patients or clients. So for us, our question is, we have things that we feel are effective, otherwise we wouldn't be doing them. But are they equally effective for our students regardless of their background? So there are a lot of different things that could be contained under different backgrounds.
We did this, not with the RTI, but in terms of the achievements. At times in the past, we've gotten reports on our.
We would just add.
Well, we're looking at
Yes.
the gaps,
Yes.
how, where our different groups fall. And again, it had to be a higher level picture again because of numbers, but I don't know if that's the same kind of thing, or if this is, the idea here is to be monitoring the RTI program and its effectiveness. I'm not sure where this is going.
So I'm going to draw a blank on the year, but I want to say it's perhaps 5 or 6 years ago, and we did have a practicum student, or it was another kind of specialized university program where we had a grad student helping us. But we did a review of our RTI program, and it was some overall results, and we would also take our students that maybe had been in math and reading intervention in 2nd grade in 2013, carry them forward 5 years. Where were they 5 years later? Is that kind of a study? But the numbers were small.
Yeah.
So it provided some interesting information about how were our intervention programs doing overall. It didn't really That study did not try to engage in an analysis of how does this work for low income versus non-low
Right.
income, English learners versus non-English learners, you know, Black students versus white students, things like that. And it was really due to the numbers.
Right.
And I think what the committee's saying is, could you look at doing something like that again today? And would the situation support you taking a deeper dive in? So we would need to evaluate that more. We still aren't confident the numbers really support reliably disaggregating it. But we can look at that again and let you know how feasible it would be if that's of interest to the committee. The next one relates to the 4K program, and I'll defer to Amy on that one.
So the item from the ad hoc was to evaluate the level of awareness and accessibility of the 4K programs and wraparound care. So we are maybe in our 12th year of 4K. So our data really shows that families know that we offer 4K. If families don't attend the Waunakee 4K program, sometimes it's because they stay with their current childcare provider, or maybe their current childcare provider is in another district. They might do 4K there and then come back for kindergarten programming. After this came out, I did a survey of the families who attended kindergarten here but were not enrolled in our 4K. And it was not the case that they didn't know about 4K. I can't quote the percentage off the top of my head, but it's a very high percentage of families that attend kindergarten or 4K and then kindergarten in our district. One of the benefits of being in the community, we have community-based 4K, is that if a child is in childcare, sometimes we call that wraparound care, they can attend 4K at their site, and it's seamless. So there is a high level of participation there. We do also have students who are 4K only, who aren't at a childcare site. Sometimes this is their first, exposure to school, and we do provide busing so that's transportation is not a barrier. So from the administrative view, I feel like we have families that are taking care of our program and they're able to meet diverse needs.
And that percentage is like in the 90s, isn't it?
Yeah, it's very high. And then we can just keep rolling if you want. The next one is also 4K. So there are some childcare sites in our community who aren't 4K partners. Maybe they haven't been in the past, or maybe they've elected not to. We do have consultation available if they have a student that like a 3-year-old or even a 4-year-old student that they feel should be evaluated or they have concerns about it. We certainly do still provide some outreach to them. And then the Head Start is a program that's in some communities, but it is not in Waunakee. And that's primarily kind of a low income readiness program. Anything about either of those 4K items that you wanted to dig into?
The fifth one seems to be focusing a little bit more on the communication process, and how families know about it. How do we help some of the marginalized families be aware of the 4K options available?
Yeah. I mean, we try to get the word out, in as many places as we can. We do flyers at the library, at the village center, newspaper. Our joining forces for families, social workers know, and so if they're doing site visits and they have a young child, Angie, our interpreter, everything's obviously translated, and she has done a good job just with incidental outreach, and if she knows a family in the community. So we really try to make sure we get the word out, and then also make sure like partners know that, you know, this is available if they encounter, you know, a family with a young child.
And your survey that you did after this came out basically showed that people knew about it.
Yes, I mean, it didn't come back that they didn't participate because they weren't aware.
Yes, okay.
Good.
Yeah. That's good. And when we went through this initially, I was confused why it came back, you know, if like we knew that the data showed that we have 90% or above participation rate and the families all know about it. I was confused why it came back as something that we need to work on. We're through that audit process.
Yeah.
So it could be something that was,
Yeah. Well, the
that part
audit-
is confusing
The
to
item
me.
says evaluate the level of awareness.
Okay.
So when that came out, I mean.
So you evaluated the
did.
level of
Awareness.
awareness.
Yeah.
Right.
But that committee didn't necessarily, they just said,
Right.
this is something we would like
They're
you to
like
do.
4K is important. Let's make sure we're.
Got it.
reaching them.
Okay.
You know, I think the other thing, and Amy alluded to this, is 4K is a district program, but it's an interesting space because it is intertwined with preschool programs.
Mhm.
And so I think you see, and this is not a Waunakee, this is a general 4K thing. You see more students potentially open enrolling to 4Ks out of the resident district because it is connected to their pre-existing preschool arrangements.
Oh.
But then when in kindergarten, they come
Mhm.
in. And so, you know, you may be wondering, why was this child not in, well, maybe their parent works in
Mhm.
Monona and they were in a program in Monona, but then for kindergarten, they enroll in their resident district.
So those are the two 4K
Mhm.
items. The next one, provide professional learning opportunities and coaching the staff in the areas of family and community, specifically about communication and relationship building. So then you can see our response there. We were trying to think of what sorts of professional development we had universally. We did have the trauma sensitive schools training in the past. And that was the one that we could think of that really fit that the best.
So again, like our earlier conversation around professional learning, it's something we'll continue to take into consideration. And along with the trauma sensitive.
Would you mind scrolling up, please, Rebecca?
Yeah, we're gonna go down to communication practices. There we go.
So this one, improve communication practices to remove barriers to information access. It could include move-in families or those providing interpretation and translation. And this isn't necessarily in either of our wheelhouses. This is really more of our student services colleagues, but we know that we have really, added staffing and really clarified and improved our processes for accessing translation and interpretation services. It's a widespread practice now that if we're putting something up to families, we provide translation. So I think that's something that we have been working on for several years, and we feel that great growth has occurred. Supporting families who are new to the district. Just in talking with some of the counselors or principals, we know that many sites do some sort of outreach to welcome new families, maybe a new student lunch or new student groups at the elementary level, certainly in August, but we aren't sure how focused we are as families move in. And so that was something that we thought we could review sites for some greater consistency.
I spoke with somebody, a community member at the football game the other night,
Mhm.
and they suggested, which I thought was a good idea, and this identifying or establishing mentor families and a buddy system. So a buddy within the school. And I know we do that to a certain extent, but maybe a more formalized program. And then they also suggested the mentor family program, because if somebody comes in the middle of the year, we could, match them up with a mentor family that can help them, kind of get acquainted and understand, what programs we have, what they could get involved with, those types of things. I thought that was a really good suggestion to maybe develop a more formalized program. I think we do things like that, but not formally.
Yeah, maybe even through like the family teacher organization or
Yes.
something would be kind of a logical
Yes.
place for that.
The next one is more of a high school recommendation, which is revisit the Educators Rising program for students who may pursue education in the future and actively recruit BIPOC students to join. So Educators Rising is a program that's really designed to create experiences in high school for students who may be considering teaching as a career. So just like, we don't have, it's not a career and technical student organization exactly the way that, say, FFA or DECA might be, because we don't have a pre-service teaching course at the high school the way we have marketing courses, business courses, ag, et cetera. But it is something that has attracted greater attention in high schools. We had been planning to implement it leading into the pandemic. It was one of those things that was difficult to make happen during the pandemic, which is when the committee was meeting, but I'm happy to say that the high school staff has implemented an Educators Rising program. We have a few students in there, and the teachers who work most closely with it, they advertise it to all the students at the high school. Not like anything you advertise and you make the call to all students in the high school. Some ears perk up, others do not. But they also make an opportunity to go and meet with different student groups. So whether it might be a more service-oriented group or an affinity group, just making sure that students are generally aware of the option. So, and I think that the committee's thinking with the Educators Rising program was kind of from a grow your own standpoint. How do you diversify the ranks of teachers, and the youth generation is more diverse than older generation. So, making the attempt to kind of cultivate aspiring teachers is important. And I would say it's important for that reason. I would also say, as you're all well aware, our hiring pools are much more limited today than they were a decade ago. And so it is in our interest to do everything we can to broaden our hiring pool. So happy to say this is something that has moved forward. Next item.
Could I
Yes.
recommend that maybe this be the stopping point?
Sure.
I mean, we're
We're at
an
an
hour
hour
and
and a
a
half.
half. We're at an
Yeah,
hour and
we're
a
at an hour
half.
and a half.
I do have an appointment
Yep.
at 10 o'clock, and I think we've gotten to 9 items, which is
Halfway.
Yeah,
halfway point, and yeah.
Okay.
If that's okay.
no, I think that's a good suggestion. We kind of anticipated that would be the case, and our goal was to go an hour and a half.
Yeah.
So good. So thank you for keeping us on track, Mark. So then items for future meetings would be to continue to go through this item list, and maybe next time we'll finish the list. In the meantime, we can circle back to the ones that we did review.
And
I
think
don't know.
about dispositions or monitoring.
Yeah, that might be a good recommendation to go finish, and then as our homework, look at which of these 17 items do we want to revisit for anything. And, looking here, most of these, they're being done, so there's no need to revisit.
Right.
Now, my question for the committee is, do we want to make that the sole agenda item for the next meeting? Or would you like to attempt to accomplish that and bring in additional AP requests that you had? Or should we just put the AP to the next meeting and just try to finish this out?
The next meeting, if we have access to the testing results for the younger students, I think will we have the STAR testing?
So I think it's unlikely that we will have the state forward testing off embargo for your next meeting.
We
The
won't.
meeting
Okay.
after that. The only
Okay.
new testing I mean, we can always bring in last year's STAR information, but I think we might have our AP graduates report at the end of the month we could bring into the next meeting. I think it's really within an hour and a half meeting or so.
Yeah.
How much do you think you can cover?
Yeah. Well, and I just think with a goal of the boards or a priority is excellence in, academics, I think it makes sense to bring forth, the results of, the ACT from last year so that that should be something that we should look at. And because I don't want to lose sight of those things. I don't know, what do you think, Mark?
No, that'd be fine. In terms of the AP info, if that's too much on your platter within the short amount of time, that could go another meeting. But
Yes.
But if that's easily accessible, we could do both,
Yeah.
and see what we have time for. If we can't get to it, move to the next meeting.
And then we'll work through the rest of these items on the report here, and then we'll do our homework.
Yep.
So what would be a good date to meet?
So I guess my question would be with Judy not here.
Oh,
Do we want to schedule now or do we want to wait till
Or wait till the
Monday?
board meeting.
Okay, we can wait till Monday.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's fair idea.
But we'll plan to schedule at the board. And actually, what would be wonderful would
Okay.
be if we could schedule out a few months.
Yeah, that would be
Oh,
good.
yeah.
I like that idea.
Oh, that's good, because we'll be busy.
I'd like to get out of if we could get out of the month to month and maybe get 3 or 4 months
Yeah.
schedule, that'd be fabulous.
Okay.
So,
Okay, so we will need a motion to
So move.
favor.
Aye.
Hi,
Thank you.
thank you. Thanks for keeping me.
Oh,